Last week our pose was staff pose, Dandasana, which is a pretty accessible pose to a lot of students. So we'll go through some of the comments that were in the thread, and then I'll just share some of mine. All right, so let's see. Nicola was the first one. I'm just going to go down the list here. And she said Lolasana jump through to staff to archer. And I thought this was great because when I saw that, I was like, oh, I totally forgot about archer pose. So thank you, Nicola, for sharing that one. Let's go through what that is. So she talked about Lolasana, which, Lolasana, we're here, and then a jump through to staff pose. So I'm actually going to use some blocks for that, just because I don't quite have the core strength to lift up right from Lolasana and go to staff pose. So if you have two blocks, you just place them on each side of your thighs. You can lift up into Lolasana and then send your feet through and lower down into staff pose, and then remove the block. And then from staff pose, Dandasana, she said to go into archer, which is to lift up, grab the foot, and send the leg back like this. And you can do something cool with the other hand like this. And then from here, you have so many options from this pose. From archer, you could even bring your leg up onto your shoulder. You could even extend your leg straight for like a compass pose. You could even move into like a seated bird of paradise. So if you come here and take like a bind for a seated bird of paradise, you could go there. So lots of options you have to go from staff pose to archer, like Nicola shared, and then you could, again, bring your leg to your shoulder. You could straighten it for compass pose, and then maybe even move into a seated bird of paradise like this. So great transition. She also talks about a modification, which I think Westy mentioned this too. It's just to sit on a folded blanket or a towel for staff pose, so you get a little bit more support under your rear end. And so this is a nice modification for that. You can also use a block if you don't have access to blankets in your studio. So a block could work just as well to sit on a block, as so. And then, your hands are greased, but you could use your fingertips here. So that's some great suggestions by Nicola. Thank you for those. Let me just hop back over, make sure we're doing good. Okay, and then Westy had a really awesome transition. I actually did this in class yesterday, so thank you, Westy, for sharing this. She talked about doing staff pose with a folded blanket under your bum, and then moving into a modified side plank. So I'm going to just bypass the blanket to demonstrate this, but you're here in staff pose, and she said to twist over to the side, lower your forearm down, and come into a modified side plank, and then come through center, go to the other side, and I think she said to go into boat after that one. Come up and see left side, comes boat, comes to boat right after that. So awesome core strengthening to work on from staff pose, just going to the side, and then switching over to the other side for a modified side plank, back to staff pose, and then lift up into boat. So when I did this in class yesterday, Wesley, it was so cool to see the students. I actually did it as a little bit of a juicer in between my standing series. And I had them first go into here, and then I said, if you're ready for a challenge, try with your hands to the earth. So I'd have them lift up into a side plank, come through staff, lift up into side plank on the other side. And then some of them who were really strong, I said, okay, now it's like peace fingers to big toe, lift up here, and come into a modified side plank, come down, switch to the other side, and lift up and lower down. So I kept watching everyone in the room as they were doing it, and then I just gave more options so that my students felt challenged so they could all have a place to go in their class. So that was a really fun juicer sequence I did in my class, and they really liked it. So thanks, Westy, for sharing your transitions with the staff pose. Totally awesome. Okay, let's see. Despoina said from Dandasana go to Paschimottanasana to Purvottanasana. which is the very, that's what you do in the Ashtanga series. So you're here and Dandasana, can reach up, go into Paschimottanasana, so you can do A, B, and C if you wanted. Then for Purvottanasana, you slide your hands back, fingers point towards your feet, and you lift your bottom up, let your head extend back into Purvottanasana, reverse plank. You could also point your toes. And the real challenge becomes to keep your ankles and your knees together. So that's been my experience watching my students in class. They'll lift up and they'll have their feet wide. So when you say squeeze your ankles and knees together, all of a sudden the pose becomes really challenging. And then you can lower back down to Dandasana pose. So I love that sequence. It's such a good foundational one to do. So thank you for sharing that one. And okay, Eve had a really fun one using the blocks. And so when I saw her post on Friday, I was like, I have to try this. I don't know if my core is strong enough to do that. And so she talks about using the block here. Hands come out to the side, lift your leg up and over and cross, and then up and over and cross the other side. And then just like, there's a sticker on my block for my kids here. I didn't notice that one. And then just, move the block different ways. So I did this in class yesterday too. I did this at the very beginning of class. So I had students, because our focus was really on your Uddiyana Bandha, so the engagement here in your core center. And I had them start in the seated position. Then we went through bandhas and breath work. Then I had them come right to a staff pose, grab the block, and they started to do these. And I was looking around the room and I thought, oh my gosh, like everyone in here can do this exercise. It was really cool to see. I even had a mom bring her 9-year-old son and he could do it. So I thought that was really cool. Then I had them put their block like this, and then that's when some of them were like, oh, that's a little harder. So you just, watch your students and see where they are and have them lift the block up in 2 different ways. You can even have them stack 2 blocks. I don't know if I could do that. Let me see. That's a little harder to do with the 2 blocks. But so that was a really cool series to do. So thank you, Eve, for that one. My students really liked it, and they thought it was hard, and their thighs were burning. And so when they said that their thighs were burning, I said, remember the core engagement, bring all the awareness to your core, remember your Uddiyana Bandha, and try not to use your legs to go through the exercise, let it come from your core center. So that was really cool to just tie into the theme that I had for my class. All right, let's see, what else do we have here? I thought there was one more. Yeah, Zailina said staff to Marichi Asana A, Marichi Asana C, then Paschimottanasana. Let me just flip over here, make sure there's no comments. Okay. All right, so we went from staff pose here to Marichi Asana A. So you bend one leg in, same hand reaches up, reach in front, then wrap around your bent legs to come into Marichi Asana A. And then you switch. You come through staff pose. Take it on the other side, wrap around for Marichi Asana A. And then release, come to staff pose. Then Marichi Asana C is same positioning of your legs, you just twist. So usually when I teach Marichi Asana C, the first way I teach is just to take your opposite arm and wrap it around your leg, and then you can take your hand and place it behind and twist. And then if they're ready, then I have students bring their elbows to the outside of their thigh, and then if they're ready again, then they can go into the binds. And then you'll take that on the other side. Come here, wrap around and twist. Maybe elbow comes to our thigh, and then maybe you go into a bind. And then she said to come to Paschimottanasana. So reach up here, peace fingers find big toes. You can bend through your legs. You can get peace fingers around the big toes. And then maybe just scoot your sit bones back to come into the full version of the pose as such. So great transitions. All right, let me see if there were any others that may have just come in. Okay, so we're looking good there. So I loved all of these transitions. Such a great job. Such great suggestions, especially with the modifications, the blanket underneath your bottom, or sitting on a block. And then, this one was so fun going into the modified side plank. I just can't get over that one. I love it so much. Okay, so staff pose, Dandasana. Usually when I teach this pose, staff pose, I like to refer to it more as a discipline pose, because especially in an Ashtanga series, when you move into the seated series, this is kind of like your discipline, because in any pose you do in the seated series, you have one leg bent in a number of different ways, right, when you're going through seated series, and this other leg has to be disciplined to stay straight, right? It has to be active, because a lot of times students will just let their other leg get kind of loosey-goosey. So I like to refer to it as a disciplined pose, where your legs are straight, you're lifting your kneecaps up, and at the same time you're pressing the back of your knees down into the earth. Your sit bones, you can even remove the flesh from underneath to really feel rooted. You press your hands into the earth, and now here's where bandha engagement really comes into play, especially with Jaladhara bandha, and not like, rounding down, so really focusing on Jaladhara bandha, your Mula bandha lifting up, Uddiyana bandha engagement here, and then Jaladhara bandha for your bandha engagement. So discipline pose, and then when you move into even the Marichyasana A, you have that discipline in your leg. So this is great to do anytime you're doing a seated pose where you're going to have one leg straight. You could always do your staff pose, Dandasana, before you move into that. Other times where I like to use Dandasana is even in a yin class, right? Because yin, you can make it a challenging and very active practice. And so doing this pose, even at the beginning of a yin class, where it's super active, you have to keep your legs engaged the whole time. You have to make sure you're lifting up here. You've got the opposing force by pressing into the earth. It could be a great pose to start with at a yin class, or even halfway through your yin class. And from Dandasana, you could go into a seated wide forward fold and come back up. You could even go into Janusirsasana A here. Really any of the Janusirsasanas where you're sitting on your heel, or you do that really uncomfortable one where the ball of your foot presses into the earth and your heel comes up to your belly button. So lots of options. Anytime you just bend one leg up, you could always start in your Dandasana pose. One of the activating poses I like to do from Dandasana is similar to what Eve did with the block, how you're lifting your leg over the block, except I'll have students put their fingertips to the earth, point their toes, and focus on lifting one leg and then the other. And because, when you're leaning forward slightly, you have to really use your hip flexors to get up, rather than when you're upright and you're using your core to lift your legs. So it's just a little bit of a different sensation when you have your hands to the earth and you're lifting up here, because this is good activation for when you do your jump backs. When you come here, you lift up, so you're getting that same sensation in your core. So I like to do these, and then also lifting the bottom up. So you could go from Dandasana, maybe hands come slightly forward, lift the bottom up, or you could go from Dandasana into boat pose, as Westy had said, cross and lift up, and then maybe just come back to a Dandasana as like an active rest pose, and then move into that series again. Boat pose, come in, maybe lift up, do each one for a few breaths, and come back to Dandasana here.